this video, we're going to cover why cells require energy and how they use energy and atoms in their environment to create and maintain order. Each cell in living organisms are like factories, chemical factories that perform so many reactions, millions of reactions every second. These reactions maintain their structure, metabolic needs, help them survive, grow, and reproduce. In order for these reactions to occur, cells require a source of atoms and energy. Energy is so crucial and fundamental to all chemical and metabolic processes. Now, there are two ways organisms can obtain energy from their environment, either from the sun or chemical compounds. Organisms that capture energy from the sun or sunlight are called phototrophs. Example are plants. They use energy of sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. A way to remember this is photo equals photosynthesis, okay? Now, organisms that obtain their energy from chemical compounds are called chemotrophs, and animals are examples of chemotrophs. Think chemo equals chemical. Animals eat other organisms and they obtain glucose and other organic molecules. Organic molecules are molecules that contain carbon, and they break down these molecules to produce carbon dioxide and water in the presence of oxygen. The cool thing about chemotrophs, although they technically obtain their energy from chemical compounds, the energy that are in these molecules is generally attained from the sun, okay? So those are two ways organisms obtain their energy. We can also classify organisms in terms of where they get their carbon. Why carbon though? Because carbon is the foundation of the organic molecules that make up cells, and cells use carbon-containing compounds. Organisms that are able to convert carbon dioxide, which is an inorganic form of carbon, into glucose, an organic form of carbon, are called autotrophs or self-feeders because they can do it themselves. Plants are an example here. They are both phototrophs. Remember, photo equals photosynthesis, energy from the sun, and they are autotrophs. So think auto equals automatic, okay? They can automatically convert inorganic forms of carbon into organic forms. And we can combine the two terms here and call them photoautotrophs. In contrast, organisms that don't have the ability to convert carbon dioxide into organic forms, and instead they get their carbon from organic molecules synthesized by other organisms, these organisms are called heterotrophs or other feeders. Animals get their carbon in this way. So animals are both chemotrophs and heterotrophs, okay? Or we can simply say they're chemoheterotrophs. Chemo equals energy from chemical compounds and hetero equals other feeders. It's important to note that not all organisms can be classified into these categories here. There are microorganisms that are photoheterotrophs, which means they gain energy from the sun, but they gain their carbon by ingesting organic molecules. There are also organisms that gain energy from inorganic molecules and build their own organic molecules, and they are called chemoautotrophs, okay? So this is how we classify how organisms obtain their energy and carbon sources. The term that's used to describe the sum total of all the chemical reactions carried out by an organism is called metabolism. In a metabolic pathway, a specific molecule is changed in a series of defined steps that produces a specific product, and we require a set of specialized proteins called enzymes to catalyze each step. Enzymes accelerate each reaction. Now, metabolism is divided into two categories. We have catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism, or catabolic pathways, break down complex molecules into simpler, smaller units. And in the process, we release energy, as well as small molecules that can be used as building blocks by the cell. Examples of catabolism include cellular respiration, which breaks down glucose in the presence of oxygen to carbon dioxide and water. Carbohydrates can be broken down into sugars, fats can be broken down into fatty acids, and glycerol. The opposite of this process is called anabolism. Anabolic pathways build complex molecules from simpler and smaller molecules, and these reactions require an input of energy. An example is the synthesis of a protein from amino acids, okay? So those are the two branches of metabolism. There are many different sources of energy, including sunlight, which we touched on earlier, electricity, wind, fossil fuels, and the food we eat, okay? But before we break down the different forms of energy, well, first of all, what is energy? Energy is the capacity to cause change, the ability to rearrange matter. Energy is extremely important in biological systems and processes. It's needed to do work. Organisms depend on the ability of cells to transform energy from one form to another. Let's break down the two forms of energy, kinetic and potential. Kinetic energy is associated with movement. This type is associated with any kind of movement, such as if you are running or your muscles contracting. We can also consider light and electricity as forms of kinetic energy. Light is associated with the movement of photons and electricity with the movement of electrons. Thermal energy is also a form of kinetic energy because it's associated with the movement of molecules. When thermal energy is transferred from one object to another, that is called heat. Potential energy, on the other hand, is energy that is not kinetic. So an object not in motion may still possess energy because of its location or structure. This is stored energy. For example, glucose molecules, the energy stored in chemical bonds between their atoms. And the term used to refer to the stored energy or potential energy that is available for release in a reaction is called chemical energy. Essentially, energy can be converted from one form to another. And the study of the energy transformations that occur in a collection of matter is called thermodynamics. It describes how the energy in a system changes. System refers to the matter that is being studied. It's being looked at, and everything outside the system is called the surroundings. The system can be isolated or open. Isolated system is when substances are unable to exchange energy or matter with its surroundings, whereas open systems can. Energy and matter can be transferred between the system and its surroundings. And organisms are open systems. They can absorb energy and release energy. Now, there are two laws of thermodynamics that determine energy transformations. Let's break down the first law of thermodynamics. This is known as the principle of conservation of energy, which states that the universe contains a constant amount of energy. Energy can be transferred or transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So when energy is transformed from one form to another, the total amount of energy remains the same. For example, if you were to eat before going for a run, you're going to convert the chemical energy in your food to kinetic energy. So then, after this occurs, what happens to the energy after it's done work? Because I mentioned energy can't be created or destroyed, so organisms can just recycle their energy over and over again, right? Well, that's not exactly what happens. During every energy transfer or transformation process, some energy is converted to thermal energy and released as heat. Recall that thermal energy is transferred from one object to another, and that is called heat. And so it's unavailable to do work. This is where the second law of thermodynamics comes in. Energy transformation always results in an increased disorder in the universe, and some of the total energy is not available to do work. For example, the chemical energy from the food you had before going for a run, only some is transformed into kinetic energy, the motion of running, and most is lost as heat. Okay, so each energy transfer or transformation makes the universe more disordered. Disorder is a term to describe how spread out the energy is in a system and how many different energy levels are present. And a measure of the degree of disorder, more specifically molecular disorder or randomness, is called entropy, okay? The more randomly arranged molecules are, the greater its entropy. And entropy allows us to understand why some processes are more energetically favorable and they can happen on their own without needing any input of energy. This process is called a spontaneous process. It's energetically favorable. In contrast, Okay, a process that decreases entropy and can only occur if there's an input of energy, this is a non-spontaneous process. So the laws of thermodynamics determine whether a chemical reaction or process requires an input of energy or releases energy available to do work. Okay, now the amount of energy available to do work is called Gibbs Free Energy, or simply free energy. In a chemical reaction, we can compare the free energy of the reactants and products to determine whether the reaction releases energy that is available to do work. The difference between the two values is denoted by the Greek letter delta. So delta G is the free energy of the products minus the free energy of the reactants. Let's look at this closer. If the products of a chemical reaction have more free energy than the reactants, then delta G is positive, and we need an input of energy to drive the reaction forward. These reactions are not spontaneous and are called endergonic, okay? Here's another way to draw this out. Oh, and quick note that spontaneous doesn't mean instantaneous or the process will occur quickly. In this case, it means that the reaction releases energy. Now, if the products have less energy than the reactants, delta G is negative, and so energy is released and available to do work. These reactions are spontaneous and are called exergonic. All right? Now, this is great and all, but how do we actually calculate the change in free energy? How do we calculate delta G? Change in free energy can be calculated for a chemical reaction by applying this equation here. This equation uses only the properties of the system, the reaction itself. Delta H symbolizes the change in the system's enthalpy. So in biological systems, this is equivalent to total energy. Enthalpy is the total amount of energy, okay? Now, delta S is the change in the system's entropy, and T is the absolute temperature in Kelvin units, because temperature influences the movement of molecules. So the value of delta G depends on both the change in enthalpy and the change in disorder or entropy. And to calculate the total amount of energy or enthalpy, it equals to energy available to do work plus energy lost to entropy. All right? So now once you know the value of delta G, you can use it to predict whether a chemical reaction will be spontaneous or not. Before we move on to the next part of this lecture, let's do a quick recap on what we've just covered so far. Delta G is the free energy of the products minus the free energy of the reactants. If delta G is positive, that is the products have more free energy than the reactants. An input of energy is required to drive the reaction forward, and so it's non-spontaneous. This is an endergonic reaction. And if the reaction has a negative delta G, the products have less energy than the reactants, and energy is released to do work, and so it can move forward spontaneously. This is an exergonic reaction. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit in this lecture. Let's now apply all these concepts to how the cell powers cellular work to drive processes and chemical reactions. We've touched on how Gibbs free energy, or simply free energy, is the amount of energy available to do work. But what kind of work are we talking about here? A cell does three major types of work: mechanical work, transport, and chemical. How a cell manages their energy resources to do these types of work is called energy coupling. This is where the cell uses exergonic processes to drive endergonic ones, okay? Recall, exergonic processes releases energy available to do work. So the cell is able to use that energy released from exergonic reactions to drive endergonic processes. The most familiar example is ATP. It's an immediate source of energy that drives cellular work. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, contains the sugar ribose with a nitrogenous base, adenine, and a chain of 3 phosphate groups bonded to it. The bonds between the phosphate groups here of ATP can be broken down by hydrolysis, and inorganic phosphate and ADP is produced, as well as the release of energy. This process is exergonic because it released energy, and we can predict that this reaction has a negative delta G, okay? So then, once ATP is broken down, how do we regenerate ATP? ADP is phosphorylated and we produce ATP again. However, energy from exergonic reactions are used to synthesize ATP. In this lecture, we learned that organisms can be classified according to their energy and carbon sources. We broke down the two branches of metabolism, catabolism, and anabolism. We covered the forms of energy. Kinetic energy is associated with movement, and potential energy is stored energy. We broke down the two laws of thermodynamics, which describes how the energy in a system changes, and lastly, how ATP drives cellular work. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to EKG Science so you don't miss a single lecture. And remember, subtract complexity and slow down. To study the next lecture, simply click the next video, or you can view the entire playlist. Hey, stop procrastinating!